Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to our second live session for Yoga of Birth. It's really lovely to have you all here. I'll just wait a moment to let a few more people in. I hope that you guys have all had a chance to catch up on the recording for the first session. If you haven't, you can do that in your own time. You've got lifetime access to that. And just a reminder, that session is in a different location to the rest of the training. It's on its own landing page, its own website page. And I've just popped the link for that into the chat here. So if you haven't yet had a chance to watch that, or you haven't bookmarked that link, please do that now, because that's separate to the rest of your course portal. Welcome. Okay, so in our last session, we focused on the sort of conception journey and the earlier parts of the pregnancy. Today, I want to focus on specifically labor and the kind of, I guess you could say, the energetics or the emotional, spiritual kind of considerations around labor itself. And then we're also going to meet with our beautiful guest teacher, Hadhi, who's going to speak about postpartum care, specifically from a kind of ancestral perspective. And we're going to look at belly binding as well, which is really beautiful. So I'm going to jump straight in. And what I really want to start our conversation around today, and well, actually, before I even start with that, let me say this. What I'm going to share with you in the next hour or so might feel like it's not that relevant if you are a yoga teacher and you are going to be sharing prenatal yoga with your students. So if your prime reason for being here is to learn how to adapt yoga practice and then share it in the context of a class situation, like a teaching situation with a group of pregnant women, it may, from the first kind of perception, seem like the conversation around labor and women's choices and how women choose to labor is not so relevant. But I really want to just start by reframing that and suggesting to you, and I touched on this last time, that you have an incredible opportunity as a yoga teacher to be a person in a pregnant woman's life who runs a different narrative to the narratives that she would be receiving from mainstream or even non-mainstream medical care. So the narratives that we are influenced by around birthing, around labor, around our care providers, and the energetic dynamic with which we go into labor and then motherhood, postnatal, are very, very influenced by the overall kind of cultural paradigm. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit in a minute. But what I really want you to know, and I've seen this so many times in my own teaching, and I've seen it with many of the teachers who I've trained, is you have an opportunity as a prenatal yoga teacher to give a different perspective to the perspective that pregnant women will be receiving from 90% of the other narratives that are available to them. And that's a very, very precious, rare opportunity. And that's why I consider this to be, honestly, hand on heart, possibly the most important conversation that we could possibly be having. Yes, I can teach you how to modify the postures, which pranayama practices are good, what kinds of asana are appropriate for which trimester of the pregnancy, et cetera, and all of that's in your course portal. Like, you've absolutely got robust information around that, even with in-depth anatomy and physiology training, et cetera. But the most powerful work that we can do, I believe, is in empowering a pregnant woman to be in the driving seat of her own experience. And actually, as yoga teachers, that's really what we're trying to do with the entire yoga practice, regardless of whether someone's pregnant or not. It's to bring the student back into the center of their own experience. And so what happens in our culture, sometimes to a greater extent, sometimes to a lesser extent, is we're very much embedded in the patriarchal paradigm when it comes to medical care. Now, in the last few decades, the patriarchal influence over women has lessened enormously. I mean, you know, the rise of feminism and then all the backlashes against feminism now that we're, you know, experiencing, which is a whole conversation in itself. I won't even go into that now. But what that has led to is, in general, in many different areas, let's take, for example, career, women experiencing a much greater level of empowerment, autonomy, self-direction, right? Lagging behind that, I think, hugely is autonomy, self-trust, intuition when it comes to our own bodies, right? This is so huge. As yoga teachers, what we're inviting women to do is to become connected to their own physicality, their own bodies. And for many women, and you'll know this if you're a yoga teacher, and even if you're not, actually, that's a scary journey to take. Our bodies hold a lot of information and a lot of memory, cellular memory and energetic memory about all the things that have ever happened to us. And most women carry within that cellular memory and that energetic memory imprints of things, quite frankly, they would rather not remember. So that can range from, you know, sexual assault, violation, like deep perpetration, right through to things that as women, we tend often to dismiss, right? Things like being looked at in a way that makes us feel uncomfortable, or being touched in a way that we question, was that inappropriate? It made me feel a little bit icky. Like all of these very mild things that are embedded within our cellular memory. And yet, at the same time, and I spoke about this last time, so that's the one side. At the same time, within our patriarchal, and I'm going to say even colonial paradigms that we live in, we still have this legacy of handing over all our power to medical institutions. And it's profound. And it happens in the most, in my experience, what I've personally experienced and what I've witnessed in women I've worked with as a prenatal yoga teacher and as a doula, it seems to happen in the most powerful way in the birth arena. So women who are intelligent, well-educated, self-directing, you know, good at research, making decisions around their lives that are well thought out, know how to self-advocate, all of these positive things go into the birthing world. And this starts even sometimes before conception, especially if you're on a fertility or an IVF journey. And literally at the door, hand over all their power and become like young children that need guidance and have this feeling of social pressure to conform and to do what they're told. And I mean, the question I hear over and over and over again, or the statement rather, from women who are on this journey of preparing for birth and then afterwards postnatally, is, oh, I didn't know that was an option. I didn't know I could say no to that. I didn't realize I had a choice. Right? Again and again and again, I hear this because the system is so strong in its messaging of, you will do what we tell you to do because we know what's best, that we literally don't even question it. And I mentioned this last time, and I'm going to mention it again today because it's the most powerful example I have. My own personal example of birthing my 5th child, right? This is me as a doula, a prenatal yoga teacher of 25 years, already had 4 natural births, a women's empowerment mentor. I went into the system. It was COVID, so that adds a whole other layer of control and protocol and standardization. And I ended up, and I'm still to this day confused, like genuinely confused at how this happened, having a medicalized birth with an epidural, which was totally not my intention on any level. And this, like I said, fifth birth. So if that can happen to me, and I now see it as a real gift from God, because what it's done is it's highlighted this message for me and made me so strong in advocating for women to see this, that if that can happen to me, honestly, I truly believe anyone can be derailed. Like we're fighting against a system that is just so much stronger than we are as individuals. It's also reminded me of the importance of having advocates, whether it's a doula or a partner that advocates for you, or whatever, whoever that might be. It could be your sister, your mother, independent midwife, for the birthing journey that we want. Because without that advocacy, again, it's so easy for us to get derailed. And when we're in a birthing experience, we're at our most vulnerable. So it's very easy for us to be coerced, or we're very impressionable, and it's easy for us to lose that sense of autonomy. So why am I highlighting this? One of the reasons is, as we go through teaching pregnant women, as we go through, or, if you're pregnant yourself and you're supporting yourself on this journey, is to remember that the yogic practices orient us towards coming back to self and trusting our own bodies and our own intuition. And that can look so many different ways. It can look like, for example, one of the stepping stones that led to me having an epidural in my fifth birth was agreeing to having an internal examination when I didn't really want to, right? So I went into the hospital. I felt perfectly comfortable about where I was at in my labor. I thought things were progressing really well. I had a midwife tell me, we need to do an internal examination to see how far dilated you are so that we can decide whether we pop you in labor ward or birthing center. Now, in my current state right now, in this moment where I'm feeling empowered and centered and, in my integrity, it would be a straight up no. It's just like a no, I'm not having an internal examination. I don't want one. I don't consent to that, right? And it feels very easy for me to say that in this moment. But in the moment of being tired, overwhelmed, my partner pressuring me, the medical institution, the midwife pressuring me, wanting to be conformist and not difficult and feeling weary, it was a yes. It wasn't even really a yes. It was just not a no. And that's the other thing, right? Okay, so there's a difference between a no, something in between that is just like, I'm going with how I'm being railroaded, and then a yes. It wasn't active consent. It was just not a no. If had I been in the integrity of my own body and my breath, and literally in an embodied state, that no would have been available to me. So I feel that through the yogic practices, through asana, particularly through pranayama, actually, connection to breath, through meditation, we have this very precious opportunity to remind ourselves and to remind the pregnant women that we're working with that they have the opportunity to say yes, say no, ask for a second opinion, choose their pathway, etc., etc. And all of that begins and ends in connection to self and self-trust. And that's really what yoga teaches us. So that's my kind of overarching method for today, or message for today. That's what I really want to share with you. And I know we touched on this last time, but I can't emphasize it strongly enough. And the trouble is that with all the best intentions in the world, many of the healthcare providers, whether they're midwives, nurses, obstetricians, doctors, ultrasound technicians, you name it, they're also part of that system of control and poor consent, let's say. And they're not meaning to be. They might be with the best of intentions in the world, but their practices are rarely trauma informed and rarely consent based, like true consent. So for me, this is the big unpacking. This is the big work that we have in front of us. Like, what does it mean to truly offer consent? And it goes right back, all the way back to our childhood. And now, if you're anything like me, you know, my sort of age, I'm in my 40s, we were raised in the generation where consent wasn't even really a conversation. And very mild things like, you know, a relative comes to visit and you're told hug Auntie Betty or give Auntie Betty a kiss or that type of thing, right? And it's just obligatory and that's what you have to do. Go and sit on your granddad's knee. And you might have a very clear no feeling around that, but we've learned to override it. Now, my great hope is that this next generation, this emerging generation, have a very different experience, because they're actually not going to tolerate the types of violations, and I'm using that word as a very broad spectrum, that we have been willing to tolerate. And I do see that changing. I'm working with a couple at the moment as a doula who are in their late 20s, and they've been through a fertility journey, and they're now she's pregnant, which is wonderful, and they're getting prepared for the birth. They're going to have the baby at the birth center. And I was talking to the father, the male partner, and he was saying to me, you know, he's just a straight up bloke. He's a tradie. He's not really, doesn't know anything about pregnancy, isn't really that kind of, you know, interested in the types of things we're talking about today. But he said, I felt during the fertility journey, like while we were going and seeing the doctors and seeing the different practitioners around getting pregnant, he said, I felt so ignored. I felt so dismissed. Anytime I asked a question, I was kind of pushed to the side. It was all about the woman and the baby. And he said, I don't really, you know, I don't really care where we birth the baby, but I would actually like to be included as an active participant in the whole process and not made to feel like I'm insignificant. And that was a really interesting conversation for me to have, because what I'm describing right now doesn't just only apply to the women. It applies to the fathers and the partners, and also to the babies too, because what happens is after a baby is born, this continuation of the consent piece about what we allow to be done to our babies, it carries on. You know, whether you let your baby have a vitamin K injection or a hearing test a few minutes after they've been born, or, you know, things like cutting of the umbilical cord, weighing, all of these, cleaning, all of these different practices that are standard processes in hospitals, we get to choose whether they happen. You know, we get to choose whether our babies are injected or weighed or cleaned or measured or held by 3 or 4 different people, or it's all a choice. And again, we forget that. It's like we hand over all of the power, and then we're told when we get to hold our babies, when we get to cut the umbilical cord. You know, it's like, it doesn't feel like, as parents, it's our choice, but it's so important to remember that actually it is. So this thread runs all the way through. So with all of that said, I want to talk about some of the protocols around birthing in particular, and some of the things that we can think about around when a baby is born and then moving into postnatal. But before I go into that in a bit more sort of specific detail, does anyone have any comments or questions on anything I've just said? Anyone want to share anything?
Hi, Katie.
Hi,
My name's Catherine. And I just wanted to share where I am, because, yeah, I mean, a lot of what you're saying is it's very relevant to my, you know, what I've been doing for nearly 40 years. As I started off as a pediatric nurse, and yeah, I'm currently working as a maternal and child health home visitor on a very small Aboriginal community in the middle of the Northern Territory.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I mean, you know, this whole I mean, I'm not a yoga teacher. I'm sort of working the opposite way. I have no desire to teach people who are not pregnant and things. And it just came about. One of the midwife who I work with was working with last year. She said, oh, you know, why don't we do some yoga with the girls? And they loved it, you know. And so this is why I found your course, and I thought, well, I just, sort of try and, get a bit more experience and, sort of obviously, develop the class, be able to develop the classes sort of, in a way that's more sort of useful for the girls. And anyway, but I just think the whole consent thing, I mean, you're talking how you felt as, an intelligent, educated white woman. And just looking at the girls that I'm working with, and some of them are girls, they're pregnant at 14. So they are very inexperienced in life in general and the world, and they can't deliver here on the communities. Sometimes we don't have a midwife at all. I mean, I've trained very many years ago as a midwife, but I'm not registered. So I'm legally, I can't do deliveries and things here. So, they do have to go off country to deliver, and that's either to Nhulunbuy, which is about 190 kilometres away, but is sort of our local town, or to Darwin, which is again, they're both flights. They have to go into town 2 weeks beforehand, at least 2 weeks beforehand, because I mean, sadly, the reality is, being an Aboriginal woman living in a remote area, it does classify you as a very high risk pregnancy, simply because sometimes, because of their own health history and, many different factors. But I mean, part of what as my role when I'm doing antenatal classes, when I'm working with them over, during their antenatal period, is also, trying to, to give them that information, and to, as you're saying, say to them, you can say no, and if you can't understand, language is an enormous barrier for them. A lot of the, their English is very minimal. They get into town and it's just taken as is, because they don't even know what's happening half the time. So it's just being able to say to them, if you don't understand, you ask for a translator. You ask for somebody to come and help you to understand this. They cannot do anything, without your consent, to you or the baby. And so, it is, I mean, hopefully they're taking some of this on board. And I mean, I often say to them, if you want a really lovely delivery with lovely midwives, and the 2 weeks that you're in there with great antenatal care and culturally appropriate things, you go to Nhulunbuy. If you want to go shopping for your baby afterwards, you go to Darwin. But the midwives, they're probably very excellent professional midwives, but they have no cultural training. And you're basically just, shipped in one side of the ward and shipped out the other once your baby comes out.
And tell me, because I think this is so helpful and important for all of us who are living and practicing this work in Australia to know. So I'd love to ask you a couple of questions. When those women are flown out of off country to the hospital environment, are they on their own? Is there someone with them? Like, how would that work?
They're allowed to take what we call an escort. So, either an auntie or their mother. It's really interesting. Quite a few of the partners are actually asking to go now, and the girls want their partners to go, which is totally, against cultural mores that, it's just that, I mean, men didn't even used to be able to know that their wives were pregnant, until there was a certain sign. And now they're, I have them say, oh, Catherine, I have to come to this class, or please do baby massage on a Friday so I can come when I've got the day off work, and all these sorts of things. But so it's actually quite recent, because I mean, I worked out here many years ago, and only primips, so first time pregnancy, your first pregnancy, were allowed to take an escort. After that, you were supposed to be able to know what to do and speak English and do everything, and you didn't need an escort. Very thankfully, that has changed, and every woman, even if it's your 5th or 6th pregnancy, you take an escort. Even, I mean, it's just, support person. Somebody can go and do your shopping when you're in hospital, for goodness sake, all those silly things that that you need somebody for. And yeah, I mean, yeah, they're put into they stay in Aboriginal hostels when they go into town. But a lot of the, especially the young girls, the very young girls, they've never been to Darwin before or Nhulunbuy before. So they don't know how to catch a bus. They don't know how to, go shopping. Yeah, they don't know how to do anything that we take for granted. So they really do need that person there.
Yeah, and I'm thinking even for the 2nd, 3rd, 4th birth, if they've had traumatic experiences for the first one, actually it's kind of worse because it's a re-traumatizing, and then you're doing it on your own as well without a support person. So that's
absolutely
the fact that that has changed is really positive.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I just came back about 2 years ago. I've been back out here for 2 years. And yeah, it was one of the things that I was actually very pleased, that had changed. Yeah.
Yeah. What incredible work you're doing. And it's, it's really at the front line of, I guess, what we would call reconciliation. It's like, culture and sort of honoring that, and then also the modern Western industrialized world, and like how we can work towards finding the sort of the best of both worlds, I guess, or like some kind of bridges between those two paradigms, and honoring both and using what's good from both. Like it's a huge project.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, it's been something that we've been working on for a long time. I mean, we used to have this lovely program called Strong Women, Strong Babies, Strong Culture. And it was all, Aboriginal women initiated and run. And it was bridging that gap. They took the best of Western medicine that was needed for the women and babies, and the best of their cultural ways, and blended them together. And unfortunately, that program, which I was involved with for a while, is no longer around. But I don't know whether you've heard of the Birthing on Country.
Yes, I have, because Renee Adair, who is the director of the Australian Doula College, is very involved. She's working with Charles Darwin.
Yeah, so that was initiated by some girls that Dr. Sue Kilday, who I was obviously started off as a remote area nurse, and who I know quite well. That's still progressing on Gallowinku Island. That's where the base for that is at the moment with the research, and they have what they call a Jackamere training, which is the Indigenous women, the local women, going through that formal training of, I mean, I guess it's a bit like a doula, but it's obviously Jackamere in our language. And yeah, so it is very much, getting them involved in that delivery. And hopefully at some stage that they will be able to have a women who sort of qualify, if you wanted, who are well, sort of low risk, will be able to actually birth at home. But I think it's interesting culturally, because we it's in, because you say, okay, well, is some of this being driven by us as white people who want to recognize these cultural traditions, or is it always being driven? And I think it's obviously a bit of a mix, but to be honest, the girls love going into town to have their babies, because they get away from the dirt and the family harassment, and they get to sleep in a nice clean bed for a few days. And so it sort of balances out that the bad side of it, with not knowing where they are or what they are, and being away from family and things. But so I think it's really finding that nice balance because, you know, I mean, like every mother, they love dressing their babies in beautiful clothes, and, you know, they come home so proud because they've got all these lovely baby clothes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so interesting, isn't it? And I think it's really what you're saying about our projections is so true. And what I come back to again and again is this genuine consent. You know, it's like, what does the mother want? What does the mother want for the baby? Like, not what do I think is best or what would I do in this situation, but like actually, and you know, for some women that will be a highly medicalized pathway.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, I think I said this last time, I've certainly said it before. I've been involved in births that have been highly medicalized and or had very unexpected outcomes, like, you know, an emergency cesarean or that type of thing. And at the end of it, the woman, the mother has been very, very happy with the whole experience because she felt that she was in the driving seat of the decision-making process. She felt empowered, she felt consulted, she felt heard. And then likewise, I've been in births that have been textbook kind of perfect, or, you know, exactly the outcome that the woman wanted. And at the end of it, she's felt quite traumatized because she hasn't felt heard and she hasn't felt empowered, and she's felt that disassociation has kicked in. So it's not about, I mean, years and years ago in my 20s, I did a project where I was teaching yoga to young women in a jail, they were incarcerated. And many of them had babies. Some of them had babies that were young enough that they were still with them, and then the babies get taken off into care after a few weeks. My God, I went in with so many preconceptions. I mean, you know, it was, the internet didn't exist, so we didn't have the level of nuanced knowledge that we have now. But you know, just one example is I had this perception or this idea that every woman would be traumatized to have their child go into care. And so I was kind of very positioned against babies should be allowed to stay with their mothers, you know, and of course, for some women, that's absolutely the case. But actually, many of the women I met in that situation were really happy that their children were going to be cared for in an environment that was completely different to what they would be able to offer them. And so my projection was misguided. You know, I mean, I learned so many things from that experience. Mostly about myself, not so much about the women and the babies that I was sharing and teaching, but much more about my own prejudice and perceptions. And that's sort of where this whole journey, I guess, around what true consent means started to become important for me. And it's an ongoing journey, you know, as I've just described, because at 43, I still wasn't able to fully self-advocate, which, you know, is just so fascinating to me. Thank you so much for sharing, Catherine. I think it's everything you just shared is so valuable for everybody, not just the people who are here live, but for the people listening to the replay, just to have that little bit of insight and education. So I really appreciate you stepping forward and sharing with us. Thank you. Anyone else want to share or offer a comment or a thought around our conversation?
I actually had kind of a question. So I actually had been thinking about this since listening to the recording. Like just thinking about like the idea of consent and what the mother wants with birth, because I was reflecting back on my births with my children. And I know, especially with my first child, like I very much wanted like a home birth with midwives. And my husband he tends to have a lot of anxiety around like health issues. And so for him, it was very important that I give birth in a hospital, because he was very like the idea of something going wrong was like very terrifying to him. And the idea that, you know, if something went wrong and we had to take the time to go in an ambulance to a hospital was just like too much for him. And we kind of went, you know, around in circles about it for a while. And our compromise was that you know, we had a doula. I worked with a group of midwives, but I did give birth in a hospital. And, you know, we made some agreements around like, you know, he had really wanted me to have an epidural, which I really didn't want to. So we did some kind of like negotiating around sort of what, we wrote the birth plan together and everything. So we did a lot of kind of negotiating. And, there are times sometimes that I look back at that and feel like, did I give over too much of like what I wanted to satisfy him? But at the same time, I think when I was in that moment, I felt like, and he was saying to me, this is his baby too. And so, he was very invested. And, I think too, like for my own well-being, he was like, you're my wife, this is my baby. Like in order for myself to be at peace and comfortable in this process, like this is what I need, which is being in a hospital with, even though you're being delivered by a midwife, there's access to doctors and like the emergency, like the operating room is right down the hall if we need to go that route. So I was just curious what your thoughts are, in a scenario like that, where maybe partners are not on the same page. Just like, especially based on like your earlier comment about making sure that like, if there's a father involved, that they're not just kind of getting pushed to the side and their kind of needs and wants are also being honored.
Yeah. I mean, my human response to that is a little bit colored by my personal experience. So I can't give you an answer that isn't influenced by the experience that I've had, which is quite clear in that way. So with my first 4 children, with my ex-husband, we were on exactly the same page around the birthing. He was completely pro natural birth. We had home births, birth center births. He's very dismissive, probably even more so than me, of the medical institutions. And it really held space for me. There was no conflict. And so, in fact, with my last one, he was, my last boy, he was posterior, which means we're spine to spine. It's much more painful. And towards the end, I was actually asking for pain relief. I was like, just give me something because it's so painful, like minutes before I pushed him out. And my ex-husband strongly held the fort for that not to happen. He was like, no, she's fine. There was like a bit of negotiation happening with the midwives and the obstetrician around that, and whether or not they should listen to me or listen to him. But I'm glad that they listened to him and I had a natural birth. And I felt very much, even though, I mean, he's my ex-husband, like there were plenty of issues in the relationship. We didn't have a perfect relationship by any stretch of the imagination, but in the birthing arena, I felt very safe and very held by him, and it enabled me to have these natural births. With my last child, with her father, he was very much like your husband, Kat, very nervous, anxious, wanted the hospital environment. So we had a lot of back and forth. I wanted a home birth, ended up in the hospital. And also I felt throughout the whole process, his anxiety and his preference for medical intervention was another pressure on me. And in hindsight, I think my personal perspective would have been, I wish I had compromised less in favor of what he wanted. It was definitely a huge part of why things ended up not going the way I wanted. So that's my own personal journey. But that said, I do think that the way that we negotiate this whole area of labor and birth with our partners is a mirror often, or the beginning, the seed of parenting. And like the labor and the birth is the very first co-parenting decision-making process that we go through. And then you got a baby and those decisions go on forever. They never stop. I'm still making decisions with my ex-husband about navigating our 15-year-old and our 17-year-old and our 8-year-old, like daily. And so I'm sure you can think of plenty of examples, Kat, and everyone else listening, where you and your husband, it doesn't really matter whether you're together or not, because even if you love each other and you're together and you're happily married, there's going to be plenty of times where you have different opinions about parenting. And it's a constant process of negotiation. So, and I feel like sometimes there might be scenarios where it goes more in favor of what you would want, and other times it might go more in favor of what your husband or your partner would want, but it's always a dance. The difference, I guess, really is when it comes to the labor and the birth is your body as a woman is involved. And I do feel like when you're making decisions around what's going to happen to your body, there has to be an extra weighting around, like there has to be extra weight lent to the fact that it's your body. Like, yeah, absolutely, the partner is important and the husband's, you know, ideas and preferences, etc., but really the only person that should ever be making a decision about what's going to happen to your body is you. But that said, it's really difficult. I knew if I'd had a home birth with Leela's dad, I knew, and I still believe this now, I would have spent as much of the time that I was birthing also managing his anxiety. And that's not going to lead to a good birthing outcome if you're like trying to birth a baby and also manage someone else who's having a panic attack. So there is no clear answer. It's compromise. It's exactly what you described. It's negotiation. And it never ends because yeah, I'm sure if we dove into it, there'd be multiple examples with children of the same thing, you know, from what they're going to eat to what time they're going to go to bed to everything. It's all a compromise, a negotiation. Yeah. So I don't know if that helps, but that's a bit of perspective on that.
Yes. No, I was just kind of curious because it's one of those things that's, like I said, ever since I listened to the first recording, just been in the back of my head because I feel like it's one of those things that there isn't a right answer, right? It's not a black and white, but yeah, I was just curious.
And I would be really lying to you if I didn't say that I do have some resentment around allowing myself to be influenced heavily. And at the same time, I also understand why I made those decisions. And, you know, we can't go backwards. So it is what it is. Okay, very briefly, before we welcome Hadi and we go into postnatal, I just want to talk about labour and sort of options within Australia. So, and a lot of this content is in the portal, so you'll get to revisit this, but I do just want to touch on it today. Well over 90% of births in Australia happen in a hospital environment. Our intervention rate is extremely high, whether that is, you know, from an induction through to different methods of pain relief, through to the delivery itself, from different interventions that might happen in that context. The World Health Organization has statistics that suggest that most women, the vast majority of women, are capable and medically able to deliver a baby without intervention. And yet in the Western world and in industrialized culture, particularly in the United States, but Australia is not far behind at all, the overwhelming percentage of women do have interventions. So I think that's where this whole conversation around consent and choice and what we, you know, like, just, I think that the most important takeaway, I guess, is that every part of the process, there's a question around it. Like, is this what I want? Is this necessary? What is the purpose of this? Like, really becoming not antagonistic, but certainly curious, certainly being open to the question asking and the feeling that the decisions that are being made are coming from a place of empowerment. When a baby, so according to yogic philosophy and according to, for example, Charaka Samhita, which is the Ayurvedic text, which talks a lot about pre and postnatal care, when a baby is born, the most important thing that we can do is maintain conditions as close to the womb as possible for as long as possible. So this is a sort of energetic principle. My teacher, Renee Adair at the Australian Doula College, she's the director of the college. She's a brilliant, brilliant woman. She says, and it's sort of comical, but also sad because it's true. She says that for most babies, being born in a hospital environment is the equivalent of being in bed on a winter's day with the doona, you know, snuggled into the doona with the blinds closed and in a warm, cozy, dark room. And then suddenly someone comes in, rips the blankets off you, you're naked, turns all the lights on and opens a window. That's kind of what being born energetically feels like for a lot of babies in our hospital system. And so very small But powerful practices can be things like, and a lot of hospitals are getting much better at this. I have to say these things are improving hugely, but keeping the lights low, keeping conversation to a minimum, creating a real feeling, or what we would call in Sanskrit bhav, a mood, a sacred mood, even if it's a hospital birth, in the space where the baby is coming into the world, you know, like perhaps there's some beautiful music, some low lighting, some diffusing oils. Usually you can't use a naked flame, but you can get, you know, little fake candles that create a nice ambience, like just creating which is also going to help the mother who's birthing as well, to have an experience of feeling relaxed and dropping into that kind of sacred space. And then we know, and again, most hospitals are getting much, much better at this, but we know skin to skin contact is really powerful in those first few moments after birth. So prioritizing that and being a lot less focused on the need to do everything quickly, like get the baby cleaned quickly or weighed quickly or immediately cut the umbilical cord, like all of these things. The energetic principle behind those can be a little bit slower, a little bit more conscious and mindful and responsive, rather than just kind of ticking off a list of protocols. Another thing I want to mention, because I think it's really interesting and important, and it's strongly stated in the yogic scriptures, is, as you probably know, the main energy line that runs through the human body is Sushumna Nadi, which runs through the length of the spine. Very similar in traditional Chinese medicine as well. The main energy portal or meridian runs through the length of the spine. And from a perspective of central nervous system, that makes total sense. I mean, that's very congruous with Western anatomy and physiology and understanding. Now, obviously, a baby in the womb has been in a curled up fetal position for a long period of time. And when the baby is born, the suggestion in Ayurveda and in yoga is we should allow the baby to stay in that curled up position for as long as possible. In fact, it even states, it goes so far as to state that if you flatten the baby out, like in other words, kind of make their spine straight, and sometimes, again, this happens less now. I remember with my first child, it happened, which was 17 years ago, and I didn't know this then, so I didn't do anything to intervene, where they would lay the baby flat on a table to measure the baby when it was first born, like very, very newborn. Within moments of being born, the baby gets flattened out and sort of stretched out like a pancake, so you can measure from top of the head to the feet, which I also now these days have the question, why do I need to know how long my baby is? It doesn't feel that important to me. But, you know, back then I was more aligned with just doing what I was told. What I've noticed now is more common is the midwife will use a fabric measuring, like a tape measure that's fabric, and kind of, you know, bend it around the baby so she doesn't have to open the baby up. But in scripture, it tells us when you flatten the baby, actually, if you really stretch the spine flat, you can rupture or even break some of the very fine prana nadis, the meridians. In other words, it causes a huge shock to the baby's system. It's very, very from a pranic point of view, from a chi or an energy point of view, it's very jarring for that to happen. It's sort of like taking a flower that's in bud and trying to get it to bloom by peeling all the petals off. It doesn't work like that. You have to give the baby time to unfurl. And likewise, they have the soft spot on the fontanelle, the crown of the head, which is also crown chakra. That takes time to heal over. And from an energetic perspective, what's happening is a baby is born very, very much still in connection to source, God, divine, whatever you want to call it, universal consciousness. And as that soft spot on the top of the head starts to heal over, so the baby, and again, this is yogic philosophy, it's in the scriptures, becomes more and more embodied. So it's not, the idea is not that, and this can get, you know, a little bit woo-woo and out there. So if this is all a bit much, feel free to kind of put it to the side. But I'm keen to share it with you because I find it fascinating. It's not that we're either completely incarnate in our bodies or not alive, right? There's actually a spectrum. I find this so interesting. So when a baby is born, there is a moment, and it's in the scriptures, we're told it's with the first inhalation, right? It says the first thing that you do when you come into this life is to inhale. The last thing that you will do when you leave this life is to exhale. What happens in between is your life, right? Very poetic, beautiful way of thinking about being incarnate as a human being. Now, people who have been in births and watched lots of births, doulas, midwives, you know, I'm sure Catherine would resonate with what I'm about to say, know that when a baby is born, it is not true that the very first thing they always do is inhale. There's often a little bit of time, and it can seem like forever, that there's a thread of a moment where it takes a minute for the baby to actually come in, right? And then what the teachings tell us is, even with that first inhale, the process of becoming incarnate, becoming fully in this body, takes a little bit of time, right? And then, you know, actually it gets even more esoteric and wild, which is that some of us have different levels of association with being incarnate in this body. So some people actually feel, and this is not my experience, so I'm not speaking about it from personal experience, but I know this to be true, don't feel fully embodied a lot of the time. And I'm not talking about disassociation because of trauma. That's a completely different thing. I'm talking about literally feeling almost like it's a bit of an alien experience to be human. I'm not even sure that I'm really meant to be here. And a lot of the time I'm not even on this version of reality, this plane. A lot of those people will become full-time spiritual practitioners if they've got the right conditions in their lives to become, let's say, a monk or a renunciate or a nun or it's like they're very much half, one foot in the material plane and one foot in other places. And some of those people will also feel suicidal. They'll feel like if the conditions aren't right for them to be supported in that experience, they'll feel disassociated in a way that actually it's painful to be alive. And then we have the other end of the spectrum, which is death, right? And if any of you have been around someone who's dying or observed the process of death, of course, if death happens instantly, if it's an accident or something that's quick, it's different. But when you watch someone die slowly, from a terminal disease or from old age or that type of thing, the life force leaves the body almost in a pulsation. It's not like an instant. You might, if you've nursed someone through the last few days of their lives, they might have a whole day where it's like they're absent, and you can almost they don't open their eyes, they're not conscious, the breath is there, but it's very thin. And then the next day they have a good day where they're really cognizant and almost like a last burst of energy, right? The life force comes back in. This is very common, for a last hurrah, and they get to say their goodbyes and be quite present and quite lucid, and then it leaves. It's very rarely that it's just fully present and then fully gone. So in the same way, the reason I'm sharing all of this with you, partly because I just find it very interesting, but also just like death is this kind of in and out, in and out, in and out of the prana, so too birth is the same experience. And it takes a while for the baby to really be fully present. And so those first few minutes, hours, days are so important in just allowing that process to happen in its natural way. And so many different traditions, from yoga to Christian Orthodoxy to Muslim faith, all Hinduism, have a practice of, for the first 40 days or so, keeping the baby very much outside of busy culture and, you know, the external world. So we keep the baby quite cocooned. And part of that is for the mother's recovery. And it's also for the experience of mother and child to be very connected to one another. But it's also partly for that process of the baby becoming more robust. And I don't mean physically robust, I mean literally energetically robust, so that they're actually fully present. And that can take a little bit of time. In our culture, because we tend to have it completely turned on its head, and we run this narrative that a woman is doing well or she's succeeding postnatally if she gets out straight away. You know, it's like when you see a woman with a baby that's a few days old at the supermarket or out and about doing something, it's like, oh, you know, what a strong woman. She's doing so well. She's, you know, coping, and she's out in the world and busy and what have you. And again, each to their own. Different women, different things will be, as long as it's a consenting journey, then it's all good. But for most women, what's really needed is that time of retreat, that time of recovery. And the important caveat around that is that she's really well supported. So it shouldn't be a feeling of like an obligation to stay at home, or lonely or isolated. That is absolutely not the idea. Traditionally, that postnatal woman and the baby would be supported by either mother or mother-in-law, and community. You know, it's not an isolated experience. So the way that we live with our kind of nuclear families and our really high levels of isolation and loneliness, the 40 days at home might not be the best thing for some women, because it could lead to postnatal depression or feeling more isolated or feeling more overwhelmed. But with the right support, it's a really, really beautiful practice for women to engage in. Any questions, comments? Anyone want to jump in with sharing anything? Okay, I'm going to welcome in Hadi, who I'm so excited to meet and share her teachings with all of you. Hi, Hadi.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Beautiful. We're so happy to welcome you into our space. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm ready to hand over to you, but I'd love if you could just start by telling us a little bit about you and the work that you do. In the first part of our session this morning, we were just actually hearing from Catherine about the work she's doing up in the Northern Territory, working with Indigenous and Aboriginal communities, and all of the different politics and logistics and stories around what that looks like. And I know that you're doing a lot of work around, you know, supporting women within culture and with connection to ancestry. And so, yeah, if you can just give us a bit of context and sort of overall big picture about who you are and the work you're doing, and then we can dive into the postnatal stuff a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm from the Maldives originally, and I'm an Ayurvedic doula, and also I work with women to just basic birth education kind of stuff at the moment. But I also specialize in belly binding and yeah, just Ayurvedic postpartum care, one-to-one, as well as Abhyanga, that sort of thing. But what makes my story so interesting is that so where I'm from in the Maldives, we had a very rich cultural tradition of postpartum care and traditional midwifery up until the year 2000. And from that point, the government decided that they wanted to modernize traditional midwifery. So they basically asked all the traditional midwives to take these exams and just basically integrate them into the allopathic medicine system. But because a lot of these midwives had learned their skills from their like previous generations and through the lineages, so they were basically lay midwives. They didn't have any formal training or anything. So a lot of them didn't even speak English, so they were not able to sit these exams and, you know, become officially certified as midwives. So a lot of them got phased out of practice. They weren't allowed to practice anymore. So as a result of that, we basically lost all of our postpartum care. We lost all of our traditional midwives. So there's none in operation at the moment. There's only hospital trained midwives working in the Maldives, and none of them will support home birth. So there are no women birthing at home at all anymore in the Maldives. It's not banned or illegal, but that's the situation. That's the reality over there. So, yeah, so horrible things happen to women. They go into hospitals and they don't, often there's no birth education apart from hospital classes, which are, you know, we all know they don't tell you everything you need to know. So, yeah, it's a really interesting point for me to be coming in and learning, you know, these doula skills, and then realizing that I'm the only one from my culture that's actually doing this work at the moment. So yeah, that's a
Are
little.
there any of the original midwives that are now have been kind of forced into retirement, I guess you could say? Are any of those women still around? Like they're not practicing, but like, do you still have access to that rich knowledge? Because I feel like it's almost like you're describing the possibility that so much knowledge could just die out if it's not somehow captured.
Yeah, absolutely. The link has been broken. They're still around, but because of the, you know, the global shift towards the medicalization of birth, a lot of the women from my generation won't even consider talking to traditional midwives. They just go with the obstetrician or the doctor, you know, like because I've been doing this work and connecting with women over there, a lot of them actually see me as a little bit crazy because I'm trying to revive these older, you know, ancestral traditions. And the attitude is more like, why would you want to talk to those old ladies? You know, why do you want to like connect us back to that? Because they didn't know anything. So that's basically the context that we're in at the moment. Yeah. But
Is
there
there
are,
any, I mean, it probably doesn't exist, but is there any statistical evidence around birthing outcomes before the year 2000 and after? What does that look like?
well, I don't know, I can't quote specific numbers, but I do know that the cesarean rate is close to 40%. So that's, and for context, the recommendation by the WHO is 10 to 15% ideal cesarean rate. So that just tells you that there's a lot of unnecessary interventions. I mean, that's just cesareans, you know, there's so many other things that go into a managed vaginal birth even. So just tells you that it's off the charts really if you, yeah.
Mm. I'm thinking about a project that I heard about many years ago where after the Chinese invaded Tibet and many of the different scriptures got burned and destroyed. I mean, we know about this. And then many of the monks from the Tibetan lineage, particularly the older monks, well, many were killed, but also they had to kind of go underground and a lot of the teachings were lost. But a few really brave academics, actually, this was mostly an academic project, did a lot of work to kind of save and rescue the teachings. And they, you know, took a lot of the scriptures and translated them and saved them onto like digital files and what have you, so that some of these teachings have been preserved that really were so close to just being annihilated forever. And then recently I read a book, I can't remember what it's called, but I'll find it and I'll put it in the notes. It's such a brilliant book. It's written by Well, it's not written, it's about a woman who's an original Alabama midwife, so practicing in the deep south of America under, and this woman worked under the conditions of you know, racial segregation, and before the civil rights movement, and then afterwards as well. And it's such a brilliant book. There's so many interesting stories. She, you know, she tells a lot of the different birthing stories in this book. And again, I feel like that book is like the woman who wrote that book is a white woman, and I think an academic, and she's really written it by just interviewing and shadowing this elder, this midwife elder, for like a number of months, and then kind of writing all of her stories and preserving them. And it's almost like, as I'm hearing what you're saying, it's like, gosh, there's such a, you know, there's just this moment now in time where we're so close to losing that knowledge, and because the women who were practicing, who are no longer practicing, like we're talking 25 years ago, I mean, most of them would be elderly women now, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
My best friend's mum is a midwife, and I'm going to be heading over there early next year. And my plan is she's basically offered to teach me everything she knows. And my plan is to make a documentary about the process.
So
So,
wonderful. So
yeah, I really
wonderful.
want to preserve this because it's like a puff of smoke. You know, you watch it going past and you're like, oh,
Yes.
get it.
Yeah. I mean, this is like real legacy work, you know. It feels like I've got goosebumps. It's like this is the work of your life, you know. Like you've just been placed here to do this
Yeah.
incredible offering. It's so amazing. That's wonderful.
Thank
Wow. So you'll be doing that next year?
you. Yeah, and
Oh.
follow the process on Instagram. We're called Mothers of Maldives. Page. So yeah, we'll be adding to that as we go along.
Okay. Well, I can feel a fundraiser coming on. We'll see what we can do, but I'm sure that there's a lot of women in this community that would want to really, really support that work. It's so important. So yeah, we'll definitely all stay in connection around that. And good on you for taking it on too, because I'm sure you've got a million other things going on in your life, like as well as this being part of your life's work. You know, we've all got other things that we have to deal with. So yeah, what a precious work that you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just it helped me so much, and I didn't even make the connection that when I was training to be an Ayurvedic doula, I didn't make the connection that what I was learning was actually very, very similar to the culture that I come from, because we're, you know, close to India, so all of our traditional medicine is rooted in Ayurveda. So all those traditions I was telling my mom about, you know, I'm learning about, you know, panchakola ghee and, you know, all these like things, traditional customs in Ayurveda for postpartum. And she just looked at me and she was like, that's what we used to do, you know, because she had that experience of having a traditional midwife come and care for her. So when I was born, she was all alone because my dad was overseas, and she didn't have a great connection with her family. So and her mother had abandoned her when she was 2. So she was very much alone, and she had this woman just show up at her house and wrapped her belly, made her sit on steamed papaya leaves to heal the perineum, you know, and gave her massage and all these things. And she was, yeah, she just described it as being such a nourishing experience for a young mother who, you know, she was only 23. She didn't know anything about baby care. So, and she described this experience of the midwife, you know, because her milk hadn't come in because she had a stressful labor with me in the hospital and then came home afterwards. And she said because her milk wasn't come in, the midwife actually got her to do an inversion on the bed, like an inverted position, and that brought her milk in, you know? And it's just so incredible, all these little things that they knew back then, you know?
So
Mm.
beautiful. Wow, like it's really in your bloodline. So yeah, I would love for you to share with us whatever little nuggets, I mean, you've already started, of wisdom you have around. We haven't spoken about postpartum really at all. So yeah, anything that you would like to share, and particularly around the belly binding. But yeah, I'll hand it over to you to share with us.
Yeah, so belly binding is basically, if you don't know what it is, it's basically wrapping the belly in a very, very long piece of fabric. So what that does is it closes up the space that is left after the exit of the baby. So there's this great big space, and in Ayurveda, as you know, well, the sorry, I've just lost my words. um, Everything is about vata pacification. So when the baby leaves, there's this great big space, and there's a lot of vata aggravation that's going on. So the belly binding is very soothing for that, to create support around those organs that have to find their place again, or the abdominal muscles that have separated. It basically realigns everything back together. And it's really good as well for the cramping that happens after birth. So because you've got the process of the uterus going back into its pre-pregnancy shape, which can take anywhere between 2 to 4 to even 6 weeks for some women. So it really helps to hold that process. And if you've had a medicalized birth where you've had, you know, something like syntocinon or pitocin, those cramping like sensations, I know because I've had that experience, they are way worse than if you have had nothing. So it's actually really, really supportive, and it's recommended to be done basically as soon as the baby is born, as soon as possible. That's when traditionally, even in my culture, that's what we would do. We just wrap the belly. You know, you don't wait, you just wrap the belly basically. Yeah. And so some women also use it when they're menstruating as well, because it helps with just holding the uterus while it's cramping, basically. And the really beautiful thing about having a long piece of fabric, I've got one of my belly wraps here. So I've dyed this with turmeric. This is my own creation. So I just had this idea to dye it with turmeric, but the turmeric actually absorbs into the skin on contact and provides a lot of like the analgesic properties of turmeric and the anti-inflammatory properties. But the beautiful thing about having such a long piece of fabric is it goes around and around and around, and you've got layers of compression basically. So you see a lot of commercial binders that are available on the market. A lot of them don't provide enough coverage. So a lot of them are marketed for like more active sort of postpartum, which in itself isn't great, but you get the shapewear style ones that only come up to here. Basically, they cut in at the wrong places, because you want to be supporting from just below the bust line all the way down to the waist. And if that entire area is not supported, and you've got those ones that just cinch in at the waist or have the Velcro that comes in and it's really strong in the front here, what it does is when you're moving around and picking up your baby, it can basically cause misalignment of the organs. And yeah, my teacher says it can cause internal organ damage. You know, she's heard of women getting, yeah, like organ damage from using these commercial binders. So that's why I always recommend going with the long piece of fabric, even though it's a bit less convenient, and in itself it's a longer process, you know, because you're wrapping yourself and then you have to roll the fabric up and care for the fabric and everything. So, but what it does is it invites us to really slow down and really be present with that process, because at the end of the day, it's a ritual. So it's just one of those things that provides so much support and grounding to the mother. Yeah, so I can tell a little story about my own experience, because when the first time someone wrapped my belly, it was my mum, after I had my baby for the first time. about 12 years ago. And she came to my house, and the first thing she did was wrap my belly. And as soon as my belly was wrapped, I'd been about 3 days without belly wrapping, after the birth. I just felt so strong, like I didn't feel like my organs were loose in my body, like a bag of bones, everything's waving around. And it's just so destabilizing when you're trying to walk around after having given birth to a baby and your whole pelvis is like loose and feels like it's going to all come apart. So yeah, so that was a really beautiful thing that she did for me when my first baby was born. And then when my third baby was born, I had actually hired a doula to come and do that for me and to be present at the birth, because I decided to free birth because I didn't want a midwife present at my birth. And unfortunately, things didn't go well. I ended up having to go into the hospital after the baby was born because the placenta wasn't coming out. And my doula hadn't shown up either. So I was basically without any support. And we ended up in the hospital. Then we came home, and I kept asking my doula to come and wrap my belly because I knew how good it would feel. And she still didn't come. She was kind of doing other things, which was a really strange experience in itself. But I just ended up picking up the belly wrap myself and doing it myself. And it was just such an empowering experience because as soon as I wrapped my belly, I was like, I'm doing this every day. I have to do this every day because I felt so strong. My spine felt like it was finally straight. So yeah, it's really something that you just can't underestimate the power of such a simple ritual.
How do you with the fabric, how do you like bind it? Like, do you just tuck it in? How do you keep it stable when you get to the end and you've wrapped it all around? What do you do?
Well, I've actually got a little video. If I can share my screen, I can show
Yeah.
the process if that's have to work this out.
I've just made you the host, so now you should have the option to share screen.
Um, sorry, let me just work this out. Ooh, not very good with this side of things. I'm not sure if it's going to let me do it on this end.
Along the bottom of your Zoom, do you have where it says like mute, stop video, the number of participants? Do you have all those different things?
Yeah.
One of them should say share screen. Does it have that option?
Yeah. It's just something else is going on my end.
Okay.
But maybe I could just send you a link to this video and then we could do it that way.
Yep. I can probably do it if I share screen.
Shall I put it in the chat? Would that be the best way?
That could work. Yep.
So it's like an instruction video that I've made for my clients that I send to them. So yeah, it's got some music in the background as well. You might want to turn it down.
Okay, let me. Oh, hang on one sec, because now I've because I've made you the host. I have to make myself the host again. 1 second. Mhm. Okay, can you guys see that? Yeah. Okay. And can you hear the sound?
No, it's yeah, it's just music in the background.
Okay, it's just music. Okay, so we can watch. Beautiful.
So before you wrap, you always apply warm oil to the womb, the belly, the hips, and the back. And yeah, basically going across, creating a bit of a shape. Yeah, it is quite a long piece of fabric. It goes around.
It's really interesting how it's really high, like it's under the breasts and then right down past the pubic bone, isn't it? So like you said, I think a lot of the ones that you can buy, hang on. A lot of the ones that you buy commercially are just not, they just don't get that coverage, and you don't, yeah, it's not the same.
No, no, it's not the same. And you really need to support the whole area because all the organs would have, you know, come up and gotten squished up by the presence of the baby. So
Yeah, yeah. Peter was asking what fabric you use, or like where would we get the fabric from?
yeah, so it's basically just muslin. That's usually like the most accessible type of fabric. Anything that's soft and thin because it's going around several times. But yeah, I just use muslin. I usually get it from either Lincraft or Spotlight. I don't know if you have Lincraft over there, but yeah. Yeah, and it's usually between 7 to 10 meters long. And about, I believe this is about 12 inches wide. But yeah, I have to double check the width of it. But yeah, and you keep it rolled up, and when you want to wash it or yeah, clean it, it's best to put it inside either a pillowcase or in a laundry bag because it can get tangled up with the rest of the laundry and then it's really hard. Yeah, it's a process.
Yeah, beautiful. And what type of oil do you use? What would your oil recommendations be?
So warm sesame oil, basically, organic if you can get it. Yeah, but anything that's like even the medicated Ayurvedic oils, that's a Vata oil would be a good oil for that.
Yeah, beautiful. I'd love to open up for general questions, and the women who are here live can ask me a question or ask you, Hadi, a question. But before we do that, do you have any other like top tips from Ayurveda or from your culture, which sounds like it's very similar to Ayurveda, that for postnatal recovery, like any special gems that you want to share with us?
I think the biggest one for me is resting. Like that's the one that's the most underrated, you could say. And also using heat. So just hot water bottles on the belly, on the back as often as possible because it's just so there's so much soreness, the body is so sore. So anything that you can do to nourish the body like that, bring warmth into the body, wearing socks to keep the feet warm, because when the feet get cold, it translates to the uterus. So I think that's a Chinese medicine thing yeah. So keeping the feet covered and warm. If you're oiling your hair or if you washed your hair, just keep it wrapped up. So just anything to counter the cold coming in, basically, but also resting, you know. Yeah, it's a really hard one, that one.
And I think that's where the community and the support becomes so important, because if you're looking after a baby and maybe even another young child or more than one, the rest is so impossible if you haven't got that infrastructure of support. You know, it's just so challenging.
Oh, yeah.
That's something that we can really plan for. And, you know, I often say to people, when you're thinking about what gift to buy a pregnant woman, or, you know, like a baby shower gift or that type of thing, we often think about, you know, clothing or blankets or whatever it might be, like material items. And I think the best gift you can buy for a postnatal woman is a practical something, whether it's help with cleaning the house or a meal delivery or whatever. Like something practical help is the best gift for someone postnatally.
Yeah, absolutely. And if she's got older kids, you know, take the kids out or just come and play with the older kids and keep them occupied, so it takes the pressure off of her to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful. All right, let's open up for any questions on any topic around pre and postnatal care that you'd like to ask me or Hadi. We're both very happy to answer your questions. Let's open it up. Or just comments, anything you want to share from what we've covered already today.
How tight do you do the belly band? Like, how do you know if it's a good enough support or if it's too tight?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. When you start off, you want it to be firm so that it's supporting everything, because everything's so loose. So you want it to be quite firm, but you need to be able to move around and go to the toilet easily, lay down if you feel tired. So it shouldn't restrict your ability to move, but it should be
Okay.
still.
Yep. Great. Thank you.
I was curious if the belly binding would be helpful, like if you were, let's say, not immediately postpartum, but if you were like a little ways out, but maybe realized that you had something like diastasis recti, where like the abdominals hadn't come back together. Would the belly binding be helpful with like encouraging like to reduce the separation?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's recommended to be done for the whole 42 days after birth, but then you can definitely continue doing that if you feel you need that for the next few months, except it can become a bit of a, if you're over relying on that to keep your posture straight, then your core can get weakened. But definitely for something like diastasis recti, I would recommend the Bengkung style belly binding with the twists in the front. I don't know if you've seen that.
No, I'm sorry, what was that called again?
Bengkung.
Bangkok?
I can write it so you can see what it looks like. Bengkung binding. So that style comes from Southeast Asia, and it's a much more intricate form. It's the fabric 17 meters long to start with, but they wrap every single twist in it. So basically, it in terms of aligning and supporting, there's nothing as comprehensive as a Bangkok belly bind. So if you've got something like that you're trying to heal, I would recommend going for that style of binding.
Okay, great, thank you.
It's like the origami of belly binding. Heidi, would you like to talk a little bit about some of the traditional protocols around diet for a woman who's postnatal, like some of the things that are recommended in Ayurveda for in terms of nourishment and diet postnatally?
Yeah, yeah. So traditionally, as soon as the moment of the baby's birth, what we give the mother is a spoonful of warm ghee. And usually it's spiced ghee, so it's called panchakola ghee, that type of ghee, which has basically 3 different types of pepper and ginger and yeah, a couple of other digestive herbs. But the reason for that is at the moment of birth in Ayurveda, the belief is that the Agni becomes really weakened. So the act of giving birth is such a huge experience. It kind of dampens the Agni. So that's why you give the mother ghee in order to rekindle the digestive fire. So every meal that you have postpartum needs to have an extra spoonful of ghee all over it, basically. And it's really nourishing for breast milk production as well. I ate so much ghee when I was pregnant and postpartum, and my baby was so strong. I never had any issues with milk supply. So that's having having that is a particular, because they say to have lots of oily foods, but it depends. It really matters what kind of oil you use. So if you're going for something like coconut oil, that's got different properties to something like ghee. So yeah, so that's one of the dietary things. Also, adding extra water to whatever you're cooking. So I often I make broths and things like that, not just bone broth, but herbal broths as well with nettle. And you can use that instead of water when you're cooking your foods. Anything that will add extra nutrients to replace what's been lost in the process of birth. Yeah. And no cold foods as well. So no ice cream, which is really hard because you just want to like eat ice cream. I had some serious cravings after the birth of all my babies, but yeah, just have to say no because it really, once again, it dampens the digestive fire, which, that's why they say in Ayurveda how a woman is nourished and healed in those first 42 days will set her up for the next 42 years of her life. So you can get, like, if you don't get that care, then I sort of look at it as you get an extended postpartum, and that can even last years because you have to correct all those things. Whereas once you've got this window in those first 40 days, it's so crucial to put all the right things in so that it sets you up for gives you a really good foundation from that point for the next 40 years, which is
It's so true. My own experience really echoes that. Like with a couple of my babies, I was very supported and really able to do the 40 days very well, I guess you could say. And I felt I bounced back so much more quickly and easily and just had energy. And yeah, it was a totally different experience. Whereas with a couple of them, just especially the ones where I'd had a baby and then had another baby quite quickly. So I was looking after a toddler. You're just not able in the same way to really invest that time and energy, or I wasn't anyway. And I noticed that the postpartum was so much longer, the recovery was so much longer. So even though sometimes women say, oh gosh, doing that 40 days sounds like, a big investment of time, like I'm not sure if I can take that much time off to just do nothing. It is an investment, but it pays dividends. Like it pays off because you'll feel recovered so much more, like just on a really cellular level, like a bone level, you just feel that recovery so much more deeply.
And it affects how you process your emotions as well. It affects how much anxiety you have in that period because it's such a delicate time. And yeah, like you, I've had different experiences with babies, and this time my last birth was the only one where I actually took the time because I was training to be an Ayurvedic doula. So I had that background to do that. And yeah, the recovery was incredible. My friend in the Maldives was saying to me, because she was sort of following my recovery journey, and she was just like, I've never seen anyone recover this quickly before, so yeah, it makes a really big difference. And it doesn't even have to mean that you're resting for those 40 days. It just means you've got those pillars of rest, diet, herbs, and body work, which is the 4 pillars of Ayurvedic postpartum care. And you're just taking what you can from there to support yourself. So it may look different for every woman. Like I know resting for 40 days can be really a challenge for a lot of women. Like I was up, cooking for myself by week 3. My husband could manage 3 weeks, and then it kind of started to fall apart from that point. So, but I still kept to the principles of trying to feed myself the same diet and, sleeping when the baby was sleeping, and yeah, doing the Abhyanga as well, which is like, that's a game changer. That's another one that's really powerful.
Yeah. Can you talk to us a little bit about Abhyanga for people who don't know what it is and how to practice it postnatally?
Yeah, so Abhyanga is basically warm oil self massage. You can receive it from a practitioner as well, but traditionally it's part of the daily dinacharya, the daily routine. So everyone is supposed to be doing Abhyanga every morning, every day. That's how important it is in Ayurveda. And it's viewed as one of the most healing self-love practices that you can do for yourself. So it's basically just warming up usually it depends on what your constitution is, but if you're postpartum, I would recommend just going with warm sesame oil, because that's the most vata reducing oil, and it also penetrates through all 7 tissue layers right to the deepest layer where the reproductive system is. So it nourishes, the part that's done the most work, basically. And you start at the head and work your way down the body, and you're touching your skin with love, basically, with that intention of love. Long strokes on the limbs and just circles around the joints, the fingers, and not doing the face as well. There's a lot of energy points on the face, the jaw. And if you do this regularly, you don't have to do it every day. Obviously, I don't do it every day, but the difference that it makes just having that touch is really profound.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful practice. We've emphasized this a lot already, but I think it's really important to say for the Abhyanga that you really want to be warm as well. Like, yeah, I usually do mine in the bathroom because it's a little bit messy, like it's a lot of oil everywhere. And just put the heater on, put some sort of heater on, close the window. Like you don't want to be in a drafty, cool place to do it. It's that warm element is, and the oil should be warm as well. Really important. Such a beautiful practice. And I do Abhyanga all the time as one of my self-care practices. It's great postnatally, but also just for our busy lives and our stressed immune systems and our stressed nervous systems.
Absolutely. It's really down regulating for the nervous system.
Yes. Beautiful. I don't know if Heidi has a video, but I have a video for Abhyanga, which I can share. Yeah, no worries. I'll make a note. Any other questions? All right, beautiful. Well, we'll start to wrap up. Thank you so much for joining us, Hadi. It was so beautiful to have your presence, and I'm so deeply, deeply inspired by the work that you're doing. And as I said, I definitely feel like it would be really beautiful for our Yoga of Birth community to support your work in some way. So we'll talk about what that could look like and how that could happen. But thank you so much for being here with us today. And for the ladies who are here live, I'd love to just wrap up our session now with a short meditation pranayama practice. So if you're able to, just coming up to sitting a little bit, just reorienting ourselves into upright posture, feeling that the channel of Sushumna, the spine, is nicely aligned. And just gently closing down your eyes, taking a few deep breaths. So we've focused today on quite a few topics that can be quite triggering, might feel a little overwhelming. So I'd love for us to complete our time together just with a gentle restorative practice of letting go. So we're going to use the phrase let go as a kind of mantra. And first, I'll invite you to become aware of your breath. So in the beginning, we're just noticing the breath. We're not doing anything to change the breath or adapt or modify. We're just literally noticing how the breath feels as it moves in and out of the body. And you don't even need to give it labels or names. It's just a process of observation. And then from that place of observation, begin actively now to lengthen and deepen both the inhale and the exhale. Long, steady, slow inhalation, followed by long, steady, slow exhalation. And this practice that we're about to do is actually incredibly useful for pregnant women, both throughout pregnancy and even during labor, and definitely postnatally as well. It's one of those universal practices that's really powerful, very simple, very powerful. So as you inhale, silently, internally repeat to yourself the word let. And as you exhale, silently, internally repeat to yourself the word go. Inhale, let. And exhale, go. Continuing this process according to the length of your own breath. Breathe in, let, and breathe out, go. Letting go of any tension in your physical body, allowing it to dissolve and dissipate. Letting go of any tension in the mind, any stories or narratives, any attachments. Breathe in, let. Breathe out, go. And if your mind wanders off or gets distracted, just know that's completely normal. It's the nature of the mind to do that. And we just gently bring it back. Inhale, let. Exhale, go. And now allow the phrase let go to float away. Just sitting for a moment in quiet stillness. Observing the effects of your practice, just noticing how you're feeling. Noticing without judgment, just observing. And as you feel ready, bringing the palms of your hands together in front of your heart. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May all beings everywhere be happy and free. May the thoughts, the words, and the actions of my own life contribute in some way to that happiness and to that freedom for all. Namaste. Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful, beautiful day. Keep in touch. Take care. Thank you, Hadi.